The wind howled through Redemption Gulch, a lonely sound that echoed the emptiness in many hearts. Dust devils danced in the street, swirling around broken wagons and faded dreams. It was a town built on hope, quickly eroded by greed and violence. The kind of place where folks looked at the ground and whispered prayers they didn't believe in anymore. Life was cheap here. Justice was a rumor. But change was coming. A stagecoach rattled into town, stirring up more dust and delivering a new face. Miss Abigail. She carried a worn leather bag and a quiet determination that belied the storm brewing in her past. Nobody knew it yet, but Redemption Gulch was about to get a whole lot more interesting and a whole lot more dangerous. The whispers started immediately. Who was this woman, and what brought her to this forsaken place? Abigail stepped off the stagecoach, her boots sinking slightly into the dusty street. She ignored the stairs, her gaze fixed on the dilapidated schoolhouse at the edge of town. A weathered sign hung crookedly above the door. Redemption Gulch School. Learn in for a brighter tomorrow. The irony wasn't lost on her. She walked towards the saloon first. The swinging doors creaked open, revealing a dimly lit room filled with rough-looking men. All conversation ceased as she entered. She approached the barkeep, a burly man with a handlebar mustache. "I'm Abigail," she announced, her voice clear and steady. "I'm here about the teaching position." The barkeep raised an eyebrow. "You? A teacher? In Redemption Gulch?" He chuckled, but there was no humor in his eyes. "Good luck with that, ma'am. You'll need it." The barkeep gestured towards a table in the corner. "Mayor Thompson is expecting you. He's the one you got to convince." Abigail nodded and walked over to the table. A stout man with a sweaty brow and nervous eyes sat waiting. He eyed her up and down. "Miss Abigail, is it? Heard you were coming. Don't know why you'd want to come to a place like this." "I want to teach," Abigail said simply. "Teach?" The mayor scoffed. "Last teacher ran off in the middle of the night. Said she saw things she couldn't unsee." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "This town ain't safe, Miss Abigail, especially for someone like you." He paused. "You sure you're up for this?" Abigail's eyes hardened slightly, but her voice remained calm. "I am." The next morning, Abigail walked to the schoolhouse. A handful of children, ranging in age from 6 to 15, stood outside, watching her with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. They were dressed in worn clothes, their faces smudged with dirt. They were the future of Redemption Gulch, if the town had one. Old Man Hemlock, the town's grizzled blacksmith, spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the ground. "Don't know why you bother, Missy," he rasped. "Those kids are going to end up just like the rest of us, broken and forgotten." A young girl, no older than 7, tugged on Abigail's skirt. "Are you really going to be our teacher?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The last one." She left real fast. Abigail knelt down, her eyes meeting the girl's. "I'm here to stay," she said, a flicker of steel in her gaze. "And we're going to learn a lot together." Inside the schoolhouse, dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that pierced through the grimy windows. Abigail surveyed the room. A few rickety desks, a chalkboard covered in faded writing, and a palpable sense of neglect. "All right, everyone," she said, her voice resonating with authority. "Let's begin." She started with basic reading, pointing to letters on a tattered chart. "A is for apple," she said, "but also for attention. Pay attention to everything around you." She then held up a newspaper, its headlines screaming about robberies and violence. "Read the words," she instructed, "but also read between the lines. What isn't being said is just as important. Who benefits from this story? Who is being protected?" The children looked at her, confused but intrigued. This wasn't like any lesson they'd had before. The classroom faded, replaced by a sun-drenched field. A younger Abigail, no older than 10, laughed as she chased butterflies with her little brother. Her parents watched from the porch, their faces etched with love. The air was filled with the sweet scent of wildflowers and the promise of a peaceful life. Suddenly, the sound of gunfire shattered the idyllic scene. Men on horseback, their faces hidden behind bandanas, stormed onto the property, unleashing chaos and destruction. Abigail's father rushed to protect his family, but he was cut down in a hail of bullets. Her mother screamed, shielding the children, before suffering the same fate. Abigail watched in horror as her brother was dragged away, his cries echoing in her ears. The gang ransacked the house, leaving behind a scene of unimaginable carnage. The sun, which had moments before seemed so warm and inviting, now cast long, ominous shadows over the blood-soaked ground. Abigail was left alone, surrounded by death and fueled by a burning desire for revenge. Back in the present, a group of rough-looking men swaggered into town, their leader, a scarred brute named Jed Skinner, at the front. They wore dusters and carried rifles, their eyes cold and calculating. They were the Skinner Gang, and they were the reason Redemption Gulch lived in fear. Skinner strode into the saloon, slamming his fist on the bar. "Mayor Thompson," he bellowed, "where's my protection money?" The mayor, looking pale and shaken, emerged from the back room. We're a little short this month, Jed," he stammered. Skinner grinned, a chilling sight. "Short? That's a shame, because if you're short on money, you'll be short on supplies. And maybe even short on people." He gestured to his men, who began to intimidate the townsfolk, their threats hanging heavy in the air. Redemption Gulch was once again under the Skinner Gang's thumb. The next day, Abigail stood before her students, a chalkboard filled with numbers behind her. "Today," she announced, "we're learning about arithmetic, but not just adding and subtracting. We're learning about risk and reward." She wrote a problem on the board. If the Skinners demand $10 a week and you earn $5, how long until you lose everything? The children stared at the problem, their faces reflecting the grim reality of their lives. "But," Abigail continued, "what if you take a risk? What if you find a way to earn more or to take less? Every decision has a cost. Every action has a consequence. The key is to calculate those costs and consequences before you act." She looked at each child intently. Life is a game of numbers. Learn to play it well. The lesson was not just about math. It was about survival. Later that week, a commotion erupted outside the general store. Young Billy, one of Abigail's students, was caught trying to steal a loaf of bread. The store owner, a gruff man named Mr. Grimsby, dragged Billy into the street, ready to make an example of him. Abigail rushed over, pushing through the crowd. "What's going on here?" she demanded. "This little thief was trying to steal from me," Grimsby roared. Abigail knelt down, her eyes meeting Billy's. He was thin and pale, his clothes ragged. "Why, Billy?" she asked gently. Billy hung his head. "My family. We haven't eaten in days." Grimsby scoffed. "That's no excuse for stealing." Abigail stood up, her gaze hardening. "I'll pay for the bread," she said, pulling out a coin. She then turned to Billy. "Stealing is wrong, Billy, but desperation can drive people to do desperate things." She bought the bread and handed it to him. "Take this home to your family, and tomorrow we'll talk about other ways to solve your problem." In that moment, she earned Billy's trust and the respect of some of the townsfolk. The scene shifted again. A desolate mountain landscape replaced the dusty street. A young, hardened Abigail stood before a wizened old woman with piercing blue eyes. This was Maria, a legendary tracker and survivalist who had taken Abigail in after the massacre. "The world is a cruel place, child," Maria said, her voice raspy. "You must be stronger than your enemies." Maria taught Abigail how to hunt, how to track, how to use a knife, and how to disappear into the shadows. She taught her to read the land, to anticipate danger, and to fight with ruthless efficiency. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Abigail endured grueling training, pushing herself beyond her limits. She learned to channel her grief and anger into a weapon, transforming herself from a frightened orphan into a formidable warrior. Maria's final lesson was the most important. Revenge is a dish best served cold. Be patient, be smart, and never let your enemies see you coming. Weeks passed, and the Skinner Gang's grip on Redemption Gulch tightened. They increased their demands, taking more and more from the struggling townsfolk. One afternoon, Jed Skinner and his men rode up to the schoolhouse during recess. "Tell you what, teacher," Skinner sneered, addressing Abigail, who stood protectively in front of her students. "We're feeling generous. We'll let the town off easy this month, if you give us one of your little students." The children gasped, fear etched on their faces. Abigail's eyes narrowed, her hands clenching into fists. "Get off my property," she said, her voice dangerously low. Skinner chuckled. "Or what? You gonna teach us a lesson?" He stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the children. "Maybe we'll just take them all." Abigail's anger simmered, a volcano threatening to erupt. She knew she had to protect these children, no matter the cost. The line had been crossed. The next day in class, the children were subdued, their fear palpable. Abigail knew she had to do something to lift their spirits, to instill in them a sense of defiance. "Today," she announced, "we're learning about history, but not just dates and names. We're learning about courage and justice." She told them stories of famous rebels and revolutionaries, people who stood up against tyranny, who fought for what they believed in, even when the odds were stacked against them. She spoke of Joan of Arc, William Wallace, and Harriet Tubman, highlighting their bravery and determination. These people faced incredible challenges, she said, but they never gave up hope. They fought for a better future, even if it meant risking their lives. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room. Sometimes, the only way to fight evil is to fight back. Her words resonated with the children, planting seeds of defiance in their hearts. The lesson was clear. Revenge, when justified, could be a powerful force. Afternoons became more than just recess. Abigail started leading the children on hikes in the surrounding hills, ostensibly to study nature. But these hikes were carefully orchestrated training sessions. She taught them how to move silently through the underbrush, how to identify edible plants, and how to create diversions. Games of tag became exercises in agility and evasion. Stone-throwing practice honed their aim. Storytelling around the campfire became lessons in observation and deception. "Pretend you are the wind," she'd say. "Unseen, unheard, but always present. Learn to use your surroundings to your advantage." The children, initially hesitant, began to embrace the training. They were learning skills that made them feel strong and capable, skills that could potentially save their lives. Abigail disguised her true intentions, but the children were unknowingly preparing for a fight. They were becoming a force to be reckoned with. Another flashback. Years after Maria's training, Abigail traveled the West, honing her skills and seeking information about the men who destroyed her life. She became a ghost, moving through the shadows, learning from the best gunslingers, trackers, and bounty hunters. She mastered the art of disguise, blending seamlessly into any environment. She learned to shoot with deadly accuracy, her hands steady, her aim true. She became proficient in hand-to-hand combat, able to disarm and incapacitate opponents with brutal efficiency. Each skill she acquired was another step closer to her ultimate goal. Her vengeance fueled her, driving her to become the perfect weapon. She was no longer just Abigail. She was a force of nature, a reckoning waiting to happen. Every scar, every hardship, only strengthened her resolve. She was ready. The time for revenge was drawing near. The Skinner gang's cruelty reached a new low. One morning, Billy was missing. A note, pinned to the schoolhouse door with a knife, demanded the town's entire savings in exchange for his safe return. The note was signed with a crude drawing of a skinned rabbit, the Skinner gang's calling card. Fear gripped Redemption Gulch. The town's savings were meager, barely enough to survive the winter. But giving in to the Skinners meant condemning themselves to starvation and further oppression. Abigail read the note, her face a mask of fury. The kidnapping of Billy was the final straw. The Skinners had not only threatened the children, they had taken one. This was no longer just about protecting the town. It was personal. The simmering anger within Abigail finally boiled over. She had reached her breaking point. It was time for the lessons to end and the reckoning to begin. Abigail gathered the remaining students in the schoolhouse. Her eyes were no longer kind. They were filled with a steely resolve. "Today," she said, her voice low and steady, we learn about justice. She revealed her true skills, demonstrating her marksmanship and her hand-to-hand combat prowess. The children watched in awe, their fear replaced by a glimmer of hope. "We're not going to give the Skinners what they want," Abigail declared. "We're going to take back what's ours." She laid out a detailed plan, assigning each child a specific role based on their strengths and the skills she had taught them. Some would create distractions, others would gather information, and still others would provide support. It was a dangerous plan, but it was their only chance. Abigail's final lesson was about to begin. They would learn the cost of survival, but they would also learn the power of unity and the meaning of justice. The sun beat down on Redemption Gulch as Abigail and her students put their plan into action. Several children created a diversion near the saloon, setting off firecrackers and causing a commotion. Others, using their stealth skills, slipped into the Skinners' hideout, gathering information about their numbers and defenses. Abigail, armed with a rifle and a determined gaze, led the remaining students towards the abandoned mine shaft where the Skinners were holding Billy. They moved silently, using the terrain to their advantage, just as she had taught them. As they approached the mine shaft, a tense silence fell over the town. The showdown was about to begin. Abigail knew that their survival depended on their ability to outsmart the Skinners, using the lessons they had learned to turn the tables on their oppressors. This was their chance to reclaim Redemption Gulch. The plan unfolded with remarkable precision. Little Sarah, using her knowledge of plants, created a smoke screen with burning herbs, disorienting the Skinners guarding the entrance. Tom, remembering Abigail's lessons on observation, identified the weakest point in a mine structure. Martha and David, employing their agility and evasion skills, managed to disable the Skinners' horses, preventing them from escaping. Even the youngest children played their part, creating distractions and relaying messages with surprising speed and accuracy. Each child utilized a specific skill that Abigail had taught them, contributing to the Skinners' downfall. They worked together as a team, their fear replaced by a newfound sense of purpose and confidence. The lessons they had learned in the schoolhouse were now being applied in the real world, proving that knowledge and courage could be powerful weapons. The tide was turning. Abigail entered the mine shaft, her rifle raised, her senses on high alert. She found Billy tied up in a corner, guarded by Jed Skinner himself. The remaining Skinners were scattered throughout the mine, disoriented and outnumbered. Well, Skinner sneered, a cruel smile on his face. "Looks like the teacher came to play." He shoved Billy aside and drew his own weapon. "But this ain't no schoolyard, Miss Abigail. This is where you learn a real lesson." The two faced off, the tension thick in the air. The brutal fight that ensued tested Abigail's skills and resolve. Skinner was strong and ruthless, but Abigail was faster and more skilled. She dodged his attacks, using her knowledge of pressure points to weaken him. The fight raged through the mine shaft, a whirlwind of fists and bullets. Abigail knew that everything depended on this moment. She had to defeat Skinner, not just for Billy and the town, but for herself. As Abigail fought, a memory surfaced, clearer than ever before. The glint of moonlight on a silver ring, the same ring Skinner now wore on his hand. It was the ring her father had always worn, the ring she had seen on the hand of the man who murdered her family. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Jed Skinner wasn't just another outlaw. He was the man she had been searching for her entire life. The man responsible for her pain and suffering. The man who had stolen everything from her. Her anger intensified, fueling her with a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about justice for Redemption Gulch. It was about avenging her family. It was about settling a debt that had been owed for far too long. The fight took on a new dimension, a personal battle against the man who haunted her past. With a final surge of strength, Abigail disarmed Skinner and pinned him to the ground. She had him at her mercy, the culmination of years of planning and training. The desire for revenge burned within her, but she fought against it. She looked at Billy, his eyes wide with fear and gratitude. She looked at the faces of her students, peering into the mine shaft, their futures hanging in the balance. She realized that killing Skinner wouldn't bring her family back. and it wouldn't solve the problems of Redemption Gulch. She wouldn't let hatred consume her. Instead, she handed Skinner over to the townspeople, allowing them to decide his fate. She had defeated him, not with vengeance, but with a sense of justice and closure. She had broken the cycle of violence, choosing a different path, a path that offered hope for a better future. The fight was over. The lesson was learned. With the Skinner gang gone, Redemption Gulch slowly began to heal. The townspeople, inspired by Abigail's courage and the children's bravery, started to rebuild their lives, working together to create a better future. Abigail, though still guarded, found a sense of peace and purpose she had never known before. She had avenged her family, not through violence, but through justice and compassion. She had saved Redemption Gulch, not by becoming a killer, but by becoming a teacher. She looked at her students, their faces filled with hope and determination. They had learned valuable lessons, not just about reading and writing, but about courage, unity, and the true meaning of survival. The cost had been high, but the rewards were immeasurable. Redemption Gulch was safe, and Abigail had finally found a home. Years passed, and Abigail remained in Redemption Gulch, a beacon of hope in a town that had once been shrouded in darkness. She continued to teach, not just reading and writing, but the true meaning of survival and justice. Her lessons were filled with stories of courage, compassion, and the importance of standing up for what is right, even in the face of overwhelming odds. She taught her students to be critical thinkers, to question authority, and to never give up hope, even when the world seemed bleak. She showed them that even in the most desolate places, kindness and unity could prevail. And so, Redemption Gulch flourished, becoming a testament to the power of education and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Miss Abigail, the mysterious teacher with a dark past, had not only saved the town, but had also transformed it into a place where hope could finally take root and bloom. Her legacy lived on in the hearts and minds of her students, a reminder that even the smallest spark of courage can ignite a revolution.